Then he said, A certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So he divided to them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, Lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. That is Luke 15:11 through 32. The parable of the forgiving father is one of the most well-known of all of Jesus' parables. Up to now, we have been reflecting on some of the Lord's more direct and literal teachings, but he also loved to share deep spiritual truths using parables, which are moral stories in which each character represents someone or something in the real world. This is one such parable, and it contains a wealth of deep truths for every one of us. Many people know the parable of the forgiving father as the parable of the prodigal son. Both of these titles is valid, but each only captures one part of this multifaceted teaching. Indeed, it could just as easily be referred to as the parable of the indignant righteous son, for that character contains just as deep of a message as the other two. Let's break down this parable to analyze its 3 main characters, who each represents, and what Jesus is teaching us through them. However, before we begin, let's set the stage for the telling of the parable in the first place. Luke 15:1 through 2 tells us that all the tax collectors and sinners drew near to him to hear him, and the Pharisees and scribes complained, saying, This man receives sinners and eats with them. When Jesus hears these complaints by the righteous religious leaders of the day, he responds by sharing 3 parables about how God the Father truly feels about sinners, how deeply he cares for them, and how overjoyed he is when a single sinner comes to repentance. First, Jesus tells the parable of the lost sheep, then the parable of the lost coin, explaining the 2 parables by saying, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who need no repentance. And there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Immediately after these, still in response to the Pharisees' and scribes' objections to his sharing meals with known sinners, Jesus shares the parable of the forgiving Father. Now that we've set the stage, let's examine each character in more detail. First, the prodigal son. The son who demanded an early inheritance represents the one who rejects God and his will, striking out on his own, making his own rules, and striving to become the master of his own destiny. The prodigal son represents the one who, having rebelled against God and discovering the harmful effects of sin in his own life, now fully understanding the chaos and emptiness that comes from turning away from God, turns back in repentance. He knows he is unworthy, and he only seeks to be a humble servant in the Father's house. Next, the forgiving Father. The Father represents God the Father, the Creator, about whom Jesus Christ lovingly and gently taught us so much. He is the one who, even while we are still a long way off in our virtue, faith, and fidelity, runs out to meet us long before we reach him ourselves. He's the one who's been watching and waiting ever since the sinner shunned his embrace, ready to run out and embrace him as he repents, going as far as to throw a huge celebration for his return to grace. He is the one who will not hear of accepting the sinner back as a lowly servant. Rather, he makes the repentant sinner an honored child once again, and an heir to all that is his. Lastly, the indignant righteous son. The indignant son represents those who follow Christ faithfully in all that they do. He represents those who resist temptation, rejoice in hope, persevere in prayer, and seek to grow in virtue by being transformed into the likeness of the Son of God. At the same time, this son represents those faithful and humble people who cannot stand to accept a repentant sinner, because the sinner's justification and acceptance as a child of God seems to imply that all their own faithfulness profited them nothing. These are those of us who have a subconscious need to feel that we are better than those whose sin may be more blatant, or to feel more worthy than those who have been devastated by the effects of their own sin. The message here is clear. To you who have rebelled against God, the Eternal Father will run out to embrace you upon your return, no matter what you have done. He will restore you, heal you, and show you the depths of his love and mercy, completely wiping out all your sin. To you who are faithful, but cannot accept that all of heaven rejoices more over one repentant sinner than over 100 faithful ones, never forget that the Lord and Creator of all things says, "You are always with me, and all that I have is yours." A part of developing mature Christian character is learning to rejoice alongside the hosts of heaven for every single sinner who comes to repentance. Finally, to all people in the world, our God is a forgiving Father, the depths of whose love covers all our sin, and whose mercy and compassion extends to all people of all time, in all places. May God bless you all.